not going to go through all these learning competencies. I think by the time you get into graduate school, you probably can read these on your own. And that should be a minimum requirement, right? But we are going to talk about medical technology as a whole, and we're going to dig in a little bit into some of the things that have advanced medical, the ability for technicians and clinicians to diagnose and communicate. That's really the essence of what our modern technology does for us. Okay, it has reduced complications, reduced the number of disabled persons that receive a disability through an illness or through a medical procedure. We have longer lifespans than we have had in, compared to 150 years ago, right? And we no longer have to wait weeks to find out what the person had, because at that point they've usually died from it before they figured out what the test results are, right? But the problem with technology is the cost, okay? And has anyone here seen the movie Pursuit of Happiness? You have? So do you remember what he was selling in that movie? Yeah, it was bone density scanners, okay? And a lot of the doctors looked at that as an unnecessary expense. While they gave a really great quality x-ray, it was super expensive compared to an x-ray machine, right? And so there wasn't a big market for it. Getting one sold was a tough sell. So that's what every time I see that movie, that's really the main thing that stands out to me. I go, man, that's some great technology for its time, but it was too expensive. And so the question always is, when encountering an expense, am I going to be able to bill for this service? Okay, it's very rare that an organization makes a decision to acquire some point of technology. Now, this is my opinion. Based on a feel good, okay? They want to be able to get a return out of it. I mean, think about a CT scan or your MRI machines. There is a return on investment there. There just is. And whether that return comes directly from the piece of technology itself, or whether it comes from increased turnaround for diagnoses, that's where the investment focal point becomes, okay? So the question is, on the bottom line there, is it worth the cost? So that's what we'll talk about. And you have to also consider there are some ethical considerations to be made when discussing medical technology. So healthcare economists say that 40 to 50% of our annual care can be traced to new technologies. That's incredible. But if you look at technology as a whole, think about your cell phones. Think about how fast technology advances and the cost involved in that. So my son, my 20-year-old, finds it's his favorite point when it comes to cell phones to remind me that I used to have a bag phone. And anybody here familiar with the bag phones? They're awesome. Yeah, you carried a bag with a battery and this huge clunky thing around it. And so I think about that and I go, that was 23 years ago. In 23 years, we've gone from having to carry this huge thing around to this little tiny, and that was just for phone calls. You couldn't even text from that thing, right? Now you got these little things you carry around in your hands, and you can access any piece of information that you want. I check my stocks, I can go in here and post something to my primary care physician to let him know information about my current blood sugars, things like that. I can do all of that in my and then make a phone call. Okay, so when you look at where we were the previous 20 years, so if we look at 40 years ago, 40 years ago, we're looking at a rotary phone. Okay, have you guys seen the video of the two guys that are put in a room and they have to figure out how to use a rotary phone? Okay, so 40 years, 20 years after that, we come into actual cell phone technology. It was faster than that, but that was when I got 20 years ago is when I got the technology. And now we're looking at having a computer with more memory than what put astronauts on the moon. It's incredible. Okay, so that comes at a huge cost. What are some considerations behind cost? What causes the cost to be so high? Any ideas?
Research and testing.
Okay, so research and testing or development, right? Anything else?
Software.
Software, okay. What else?
Manufacturing.
Manufacturing costs, yep. And included in manufacturing is materials, right? Material costs. They're talking about our lithium-ion batteries now, that the cost of lithium over the next 20 years is going to skyrocket because there's only a limited amount of lithium on the planet. Unless it's kind of like they said, well, there's only a limited amount of oil on the planet. Then we strike oil and we come up with new technologies on development of oil, on how to extract oil from the earth. There's always somebody thinking ahead, but those things have a high expense behind them, right? So our idea, everyone understands supply side controls or supply side rationing? Everyone know what that is? Would somebody like to explain that to the rest of you? So how does supply side controlling happen? If I have the supply, how can I control cost or production in this situation? I can limit the number of things that are produced, right? And as Americans, do we like that when somebody limits our access to something? No, we don't like that, right? It's kind of the whole debate behind healthcare as a whole, right? We don't want to limit access, and so when we limit access, it drives cost up. So if I have a monopoly on something, I can control access. And when I can control access, I can control cost. Now, controlling technology has the same type of and I am doped up on cold medicine like crazy. So if you really want to, this could be a really bad lecture today. So I'm just giving you a heads up. So if I can control access on my end and prevent you from having it, and I can drive up costs, what does that do for me as the controller of those costs and controller of access? It gives me large amounts of bargaining, especially when it's something that's a need. Okay, now if I'm controlling my potato chip market, somebody can always step in. It's hard to come up with a monopoly on potato chips, right? Everybody and their brother can go out. You can make your own, right? If you're really that hard up for them. But we're talking about healthcare here. We're talking about technology. Limiting that access can affect an entire population. Okay? So what are the ethical issues behind controlling access and controlling access to medical technology? Are there any? I mean, and what is that? Go ahead and throw one out now. Give me a chance to take a drink. I'm almost a third of the way through.
Limiting or denying access to care for a vulnerable population.
Okay, so you have a vulnerable population, and those people can't get access, and they're sick. Nobody wakes up Monday. I always use this when we give orientation at the hospital. Nobody wakes up Monday morning, for example, and says, hey, guess what I want to do today? I'm going to check myself in the hospital. That's what I want to do. I want to wake up, go to the hospital, have someone come in, poke me, prod me, take all these tests, wake me up every 2 hours of the day, and ask me, "Are you doing okay?" Nobody does that, right? Eat some really crappy food. You know, I mean, that's not what we want to do. We're sick. We want to be fixed. And so then we go in and we find out that there's no access. Now let's think about technology as a whole. The other ethical issues behind this is it's kind of double-sided. Who makes the decision that says that I shouldn't have access to a test? Okay. At what point do we even make someone, is it okay for me to not tell someone of the availability of a test as a physician? I mean, the list is a mile long of all these ethical considerations that are out there that you have to just think about, right? So if we look at the technology costs, you can see that our public technology costs have gone up in the United States by about 1%, almost 2%, in 5 years. But our industry costs dropped quite a bit. So costs are down overall in technology, but you think about how much money that is. I mean, you're talking $119 billion in the United States alone, just on R&D. Okay, that's a lot of money. That right there represents larger amounts of money than a lot of I would even say most of the countries on this earth, their GDPs. That's a lot of money. Okay, I mean, I'd be happy to make 1 billion in my lifetime. Can you imagine what that'd be like? Yeah, you spend 80. Say you're on the earth 80 years, right? You made $1 billion in 80 years. That's pretty good living, right? Not going to happen for me. All right. That is a lot of money spent in research and development, which tells us what? What do we understand? If somebody's spending that kind of money on research and on development, what is there?
High demand.
There's a demand for it, right? There's a perceived need that this needs to happen. Now, needs can come in two areas, in my opinion. You have, absolute need, like I need this in order to live, and then there's the other perceived need from an industrial standard that says I need to have this in order to stay viable in my business. The business that falls behind is the business that goes out of business, right? So keep that. Those are things to keep in the back of your mind. So let's talk about what we would define medical technology as, okay? So if we're talking about human and non-human inputs in production, what type of items can be considered technology? We obviously talked about MRIs, we talked about those things. What other things can be considered technology? Okay, health records, right? Okay, anything else? Guys are super quiet. Taking the same cold medicine I am. Is that what it is? Okay. How about things like tests, laboratory tests? I mean, how long did it used to take the doctor to figure out that you had the flu? Forever. Now they can do a nose swab and boom, just a little bit they can tell you if you've got it or not, right? That type of technology is amazing. The actual vaccinations themselves can be considered technology. Or, like one of my employees likes to call it every year when we get our flu vaccination, it's wizardry. He's like, this is some kind of weird magic. I don't get sick. I get this little tiny thing shoved in my arm. It's amazing how many advances we've made. So my childhood pediatrician, her name was Leela Denmark. If you ever get a chance to Google her name, she was the oldest living practicing physician in the United States. She was actually my mom's mom's a pediatrician, and my mom is 75. Um, she she was the first female graduate, I believe, from the Medical College of Georgia. Really brilliant lady. She helped. I want to say she helped develop the inoculation against. I can't even remember what it was, but she was on a team that helped develop these things. It was considered cutting edge at the time. But yeah, look up Leela Denmark. She lived to be like 108 or 110 years old. I mean, it was crazy. She practiced until she was 100. So, pretty wild. Brilliant lady. But can you imagine the technology that she used throughout her career? Now we have physicians who come into practice who don't know how to diagnose without a machine. They have to have input. So we've covered a broad spectrum in our education. This technology has also led to the development of a bunch of different specialties, both good and bad background on this, in my opinion. All right, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you think about prostheses, different types of therapies. You think about where we've come with joint replacement. It used to be that if you got a knee replacement or a hip replacement, you were down for the count, right? Now, you get your hip replacement, stay in the hospital overnight. Next day, they check you, they get you up and they walk, and they may send you home that day. And then you just do outpatient therapy. That's pretty remarkable. Same with heart surgeries. Good grief, if you had triple bypass surgery years ago, that was just a prelude to death, right? Now it's like, oh, we're going to go put a drug-eluting stent in, and you'll be fine for years. They don't even have to open you up. They run a tube right up your leg and drop it right in where they need it. It's pretty wild. How about so one of my favorite cyclists of all time is a guy by the name of he's an Italian cyclist. Now I've drawn blanks. I can't see. This is bad. This is really bad. I'll have to show you a picture of him. He's missing an arm and a leg. There's some really incredible videos of this guy, but because of the prosthetics that he has, he's able to perform just like a person who hadn't lost any limbs. It's pretty incredible. Some of the people we see that come in our rehab hospital, no short of miraculous. Come in, dual amputees, leg, below the knee, and they learn to walk with prosthetics. It's incredible, right? Incredible. Unheard of 50 years ago. A person would have been wheelchair bound for the rest of their lives. All right. So information technology is different. It's a specific area of technology itself, okay? This is data gathering. And so think about the areas within a healthcare organization where information technology would be a big piece. What's the first thing that pops in your mind?
Administration.
Administration. Yep. We like data. I mean, my whole job revolves around data acquisition and interpretation. You can't trend something unless you have something, right? And you have to have it in a historical setting. So let's look. We probably consider our financial outcomes, right? We want to look at, as a hospital, you can meet all of your outcomes for treatments and still never make a penny. So remaining financially viable as an organization is just as important as meeting expectations for health in a healthcare environment, because if you can't keep ends met, it will go out of business, and then there will be no services available to the community. Okay. You want to look at the utilization of services. Now, these utilization reviews as a whole are useless because, and this is why, because most organizations are not objective. Most organizations will justify the use of something in order to just maintain status quo. They don't want to change. And that's why most organizations don't change and most organizations fail. Utilization review is very good when done objectively. Does everybody here know what utilization review is? I'm sorry, I didn't even ask that question. So utilization review is looking at your total resources, total procedures, total use of a piece of equipment, anything that you can use in your healthcare setting. You will review it and see if you need it, and if it's being used correctly, and if it's being used economically. So sometimes, for example, we'll do a utilization review of for example, what was one we did most recently? Well, we're doing opioids. That's a big one. We look at opioids for our hospital to see how they're being used. A lot of physicians I see a patient come in, they're on a whole litany of pharmaceuticals, and they don't want to make adjustments because they know they're only going to have this patient. You know, if you're in a rehabilitation hospital, you're only going to have that patient for 2 weeks. Why would I make some major adjustments if I'm only going to have to keep my eye on them for a couple of weeks? And in an acute care hospital, it's worse because they don't want to rock the boat unless it's something that's absolutely contributing to the problem. Then they're not going to. And so utilization review of this can be really helpful. For example, if you come into a rehabilitation hospital and you're on a huge list of medications, and you're a Medicare patient, for example, we are on the hook for all of your meds, period. So if we do a utilization review and we find out, first of all, this person doesn't even need this medication, we can reduce not only the amount of medication that a patient's taking, but we can also reduce our cost because the patient doesn't need those medications. Now, we may do a review sometimes and find out that, man, they actually need 2 more medications. That's happened. Okay? But it's really, in a situation like that, if you're truly objective and you're truly focused on the patient's care, then you will make those adjustments, and it's really helpful. So if you look at, for example, if your organization has an MRI machine and you only use the MRI machine twice a month, and you do a utilization review, the only reason you have an MRI machine is because the facility across town has one, and you're never using it, it's a bad expense. If you're honest with yourself, you put that thing up for sale and you get rid of it. And then you just outsource all of your MRIs. Just much simpler, okay? We look at clinical quality. This is if it weren't for this, I wouldn't have a job, okay? I look at every ridiculous data point. I'll show you a copy of our electronic health record here in a minute, and then I'll show you some of the data points that we pull, okay? But we want to be able to see whether the quality of our organization meets expectations or exceeds expectations. So about 3 weeks ago, we found out that our hospital was 2 years in a row, I'm going to brag, 2 years in a row, the #1 hospital for clinical outcomes in the Encompass Health out of 132 hospitals. So that's pretty good, right? It's because of that. We're assessing clinical quality. Also in patient satisfaction. So we got double whammy there, which is great because your patient sat is part of your reimbursement now. So we have a really good organization. We can sit back and not bother reviewing anything at all, and then we fail. Somebody passes, but you have to constantly be assessing quality. Okay. We also look at the trends in the healthcare delivery. We want to see where we're heavy in areas and where we're slight in others, and then we'll look at the community as a whole and find out what it is in the community that we can do better to help address their needs, or find out where we're missing the mark. Let's see, productivity. Has anyone ever done a process flow analysis in here? That's a super exciting event. I'm sarcastic when I say that. It's not that much fun. It's really tedious. Literally what happens is you will go through and you'll look at a process, you'll put it on the board, and you'll list it step by step. You'll look at the physical environment of that process and see what areas need to be improved to improve efficiency. Literally drawing a map of a location to see where people cross over each other at times, and whether for example, they may do one of an operating room and find that placing equipment in one specific area causes congestion and confusion. And so separating out different pieces of equipment throughout the room makes it easier for a physician to get the tools they need quicker. And so it improves efficiency, which in turn improves productivity. And when productivity is high, costs go down. Strategic planning, IT, these outputs will allow us to be able to look at where we want to be, right? Because we've assessed the community and we've decided that we may need to add another piece of our business, and we need to understand what demand is out there. Everybody excited? Tell nobody's asleep. Made it 35 minutes. Congrats. All right, so informatics is different than just information. If you are super lucky, you'll get to take me in my summer class, my quality informatics class. It's a thriller. Just put my little plug in there. You will. I'm gonna see if we can shorten it to 6 weeks this year. In 6 weeks, we'll cover so much information you never really dig into it, but we'll talk a lot about why we improve through information. So what we'll do is we would look at specific treatments, cancer, nursing care, imaging, and determine how to improve processes within those treatments, and how we can improve the outcomes. Okay, I mean, think about it. If we didn't try to improve processes, we'd still be living like we'd still be using a bag phone. Okay, everybody would have on their desk big bag phone. How awesome would that be? Aren't you glad that somebody decided I can improve this? Okay. So electronic health records. Okay. I actually updated these slides, and for some reason when I pulled it up, and must be my cold talking, but when I got online, it didn't show the 3 slides I added. So you got 3 slides less. Congratulations. But what's the difference between an electronic health record and an electronic medical record? We use those names, EMR and EHR, interchangeably at times.
Is it health more comprehensive?
Yeah. EHR is more comprehensive. It's a situation where we're allowing information to be more historical. And so it allows us the opportunity to look back beyond a single stay. An electronic medical record will allow us typically to just look at one location's worth of information. So for example, you might go to your primary care physician and he has some historical background on you, but say you need to go see a specialist, that specialist may not have access to that information. So that's just a medical record for him to have. And then the specialist will have a medical record that's based on you. And then they may request your information from the primary care, and the primary care will literally print it off and fax it over or have a courier deliver it. And then they'll look through all those paper documents for the information they need. But an EHR is more fluid and allows us to have security and stability, even though it's broader and allows for more people to give inputs and more people to look at it. So your specialist can look at it, your physicians group can look at it, everyone can look at it. It requires a specific interface, though, is the problem. Meaning that you have to have access. So, for example, I believe Valid uses Epic, the Epic system, if I remember correctly, and that is a huge system. We use a Cerner-based system, and those two systems do not speak together. But our Cerner system will speak to a lot of other systems. It just doesn't work with Epic. Kind of a bummer, right? But if you think about it on a broader scale, there's over 130 hospitals in our system, and we can all speak to one another. You can go to any rehab hospital in the country just about and have your data read by a physician. So that's pretty good, you know. It's just too bad that we don't relate well to our community hospitals. So let's see. So here's a screenshot, and this is not of any patient, don't worry. This is our little toolbox that we train people with. So it's kind of blurry, I apologize. You'll see on the left we have different categories here, and I can't even see that. So you have a section for documentation, you have a form browser, some notes. This will be all of the patient's allergies here, demographic information underneath this tab. You have a patient care summary. Let's go with this. So this is documentation. You can see a physician's progress note here. You have the NIH stroke scale that's included in there, some case management, social work documentation, the history and physical, the post-admission assessment. You might see an interdisciplinary plan of care here. All of these things here allow a physician or another clinician to look at this and say, this is what is going on with this patient. Especially when you pull up an HMP, you see that HMP, and that gives a lot of background information. So that's pretty useful, right? Then you end up, for example, if you want to go into the specifics on therapeutic, these are some of the things that that they may want to give as an input. So someone will go through here, check in here, and talking about the respiratory analysis of a patient, and then give an input on what is going on with this patient, right? And in turn, it'll result in a report. Here's a stroke scale. Let you know where this patient is on this stroke scale. Okay, gives you a score, and so then you end up with. Let's see if I've got the physician's dashboard on here. This is the clinician dashboard. So on this here, you'll see the current status, the discharge plan. You'll see any activity on the left side. They have an advanced directive. And on the right, you'll see the vital signs and any outstanding orders. You can actually cater this. There's 3 tabs on the top about assessment recommendations. This will allow a clinician to do an at-a-glance view of this. You know, it'll even give them the fall rate, what the patient's fall, the ability to fall would be like, what their most recent pain assessment was like, just to kind of give them an idea before they walk into some place, if they feel like they need to dig into one of these side units. So this will give you a list of all the orders and whether they've been completed. Kind of important to see this, right? But it's all within a few clicks. How nice that is. Has anybody here ever had to deal with a paper chart? So we had the great opportunity of being at the time a Mountain States Hospital, and because we were Mountain States Hospital, we had a specific medical record, electronic health record. I can't even remember what it was, it's been so long. And then when we went through the merger with Health South in our area had not gone to an electronic record. So we went back in time and went to paper charting. We had nurses who had never charted on paper before. And now they have to chart on paper. And we spent 6 months like that. It was miserable. And then when we went back to this, it was amazing. Everybody was so grateful because now you don't have to sit there and fill out a note for every little thing, handwrite all of this. It's much easier to type, right? And we have Dragon, which means I can dictate whatever I want to, and it's pretty accurate. So, been on both sides of this, and it is always better to be on electronic. You have to have lots of backup plans, though. Okay. And you have to have a backup plan for your backup plan, because you end up having downtime. People will ultimately have to chart on paper. Okay. This doesn't have any of my notes about the high-tech law or HIPAA or anything in here. You guys are getting off easy, because if I don't talk about it, then you don't have to worry about it, right? So the only big issue with EHRs was people were really worried about confidentiality. You think of all the breaches in privacy that we've had just through, Facebook, email systems. People are really, I've said it before. We're willing to give out a Facebook pass. We use Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account anymore, but Facebook. Were you willing to use that Facebook password to log into a multitude of things, right? Oh yeah, use Facebook to log in, right? But man, when we get to our health record, we are super paranoid. We're like, oh, I'm not sharing that. Why would I share my information across physicians? That physician might might sell my information. Really? But we do like our confidentiality when it comes to our health record. The high-tech law and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 basically tried to secure privacy for all of us, allowing us to have control of our health records. I had a request today for medical record, and there's a process, but you can have access to whatever you want with your health information. You could restrict it as much as you want. So a while back, so HIPAA is no big deal. I'm kidding. It's a huge deal. HIPAA will burn you to a crisp if you are not careful. I cannot put enough fear in you about HIPAA, okay? Now, a lot of people freak out about HIPAA to the point that they think everything is going to be a HIPAA violation. There's really has to be some specific criteria that you meet in order for it to be an actual violation of the HIPAA law. But once you're burned, you're burned. And HIPAA is an unusual thing in that if something happens within your organization, you will get fined. The organization is going to get fined if you are found to be non-compliant with HIPAA law. But also the individual that allowed for the disclosure to occur, they also get fined. So for example, you leave a piece of paper that has patient information laying out on your desk, and somebody comes over and they take a picture of that piece of paper and they use that for whatever they're going to use it for. Let's give a horrible scenario. It's got patient demographic information on there, and they apply for a credit card in that patient's name, and they spend thousands of dollars in that patient's name, and then they find out that it came from your hospital and that you were the one that left it out, because they'll find out. That's how it always works. They trace it back through an IP address that somebody used. Want to see where that was. They'll check cameras. They do everything. It's like a really intimidating investigation. And the hospital gets fined for making it easy for that individual to have made that accessible. Okay, so the hospital gets fined. The hospital, basic HIPAA fine, probably in the range of $2,500. They start at I think they start at $250, $250, but they go all the way up into the millions, depending on how systematic the problem is. But hospital gets fined, and then they look over to the individual and they say, "Oh, guess what? You also get fined." So this is what I always tell everybody in our hospital orientation: if you're okay giving away money, feel free. But if my hospital gets fined, you know that you're going to get fined, because I'm going to guarantee that you get fined. Okay? Because I'm going to find out who it was that disclosed the information. So a little while back, we had, for example, I don't remember how long ago it was. It's been a long while. We had someone goes in on admission with the patient and doesn't ask the patient whether or not it's okay to disclose their medications in front of the people that are in the room with them. Just starts having a conversation. So they have this conversation, and the patient says, "Wait a second, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about this right now." And the person says something to the effect, "Well, we're all family in here, it's no big deal," and goes on and says something about a medication, and the person says something about the medication. "Which medication is that?" And then the person says, "Oh, your HIV medication." And the family members that were in the room never knew that this individual was HIV positive. That's bad news, people, okay? That's the whole reason that this law was put into place, was to protect individuals from having information disclosed that they don't want disclosed, okay? So in a situation like this, what do you do? You're in administration. What do you do?
Cringe.
Cringe? More than cringe, yeah, that's where you start.
You apologize and take responsibility.
Yeah, apologize, take responsibility, then you make your filings, right? What do you do with the employee? See, that's what everybody always says, knee-jerk reaction. So there's three different levels involved, right, with something like this. You have, they look at HIPAA as, was it malicious? Did they do it on purpose? Okay, that's like a level 3. That's automatic discharge, okay? You have to, if the person's being malicious. If it's a level 2, they didn't mean to, they knew the policy, they know the law, they know that this is out there, but they did it anyway, thinking there wouldn't be repercussions. That's like a level 2. Level 1, they're not aware of the law, they're not aware of any of the possibilities, and they just say something or leave something out, okay? What do? You educate on a level 1, you educate, right? And then you say, now that you know, you will be held accountable. A level 2 is, you're going to re-educate, and then you're going to reprimand the person and probably put them on a final warning. Say, this ever happens again, you're out the door. Level 3, you're out the door, okay? But most people, in this situation, which one was this? A level 1, 2, or 3? It was level 2, right? So yeah, that's what we would do. We would say, hey, here's the deal. Let's talk about this. I want to understand what you understand. And then I guarantee that person is very apologetic. Yeah, been caught. And you can't go back. That's the thing. You can never put that genie back in the bottle, can you? Once that's out, it's out. Once information's out, you can't go back. Okay? So.
Do you have to settle with the person, or like?
Depends on the situation. If they file a lawsuit, then usually there's a settlement, yeah. And that gets ugly because how do you put a dollar on that, right? I mean, that can be really ugly. If they don't file a lawsuit, you're at minimum going to get fined by the government. And that's ugly too, you know. And like I said, if I get fined, you're getting fined. That's just how it works. I value my budget. So, yeah. So HIPAA is very important. It's very, very important. I can't stress that enough. When in doubt, just don't leave it out. That's what I tell everybody. You know, just don't leave any information out. I have a pet peeve at the hospital where I see people, they print stuff off, they want to mark stuff, to highlight it so they're aware, make notes, and then they take it and they stick it in this little box under their desk that's to shred later. Every desk in the hospital is within like 35 feet of a shred bin. Just walk it over there, because all I have to do is go over there and fish something out. If it looks like I can use it, I can take the information off there, and it's got their IP address on there on the bottom from where they printed it out. Somebody catches me with that on there, that person, I get fired, that person gets fired. It's ugly all around, right? Don't leave it out. So that was the biggest concern, though, with the HR, is that my information was going to get out. Your information could get out. If it's a true connected across the board, I'm in Maryland, I get injured, I need them to pull up my health information, they can pull it up. That's the problem. They were concerned about basically limiting the number of holes in this process, okay? So that's why we ended up with 1 million different electronic health records that don't speak to one another. All right, so shifting gears, you guys doing okay? We're almost an hour in. Got a little more than half left, okay? And less than half of the slides, so we're doing good. So e-health. Can you give me an example of e-health? Give me a service that's e-health.
Telemedicine.
Telemedicine's a little different, just slightly. This is more like WebMD. You know, think about it. You can go into WebMD and give yourself 1 million misdiagnoses, right? Because that's what we do. We go on there, it's like, oh my gosh, I have a rash. And then you go on there and you start looking at it and you find out that you've got the most rare disease of all time. And then you go to your doctor and just finds out that, you know, you're allergic to penicillin, right? That's what we do. We misdiagnose ourselves. But that's what e-health is, right? And anyone, this is not regulated, anyone can set up an e-health site, right? So tonight, each of you are going to go online and you're going to set up your own e-health site and help people cure themselves from all their maladies. And you're going to get rich doing it, right? That's the whole reason it's out there. This is usually about money. It's usually about advertisements. But that's, you know, different commercial products. You have all these different services. You have things like herbal remedies. You have, it used to be, for example, back when Lance Armstrong was in his heyday, he had a website called livestrong.com, I think, and it had a whole bunch of so-called scientists and trainers and healthcare practitioners on there with their opinions on things of how to improve your training and whatnot. And now they sold it to another organization, and it's pretty much a lot of good science mixed with a bunch of voodoo science, right? So it's really interesting how these things can just kind of evolve over time depending on the clientele. But anyone can provide that. You do not have to be a credentialed physician or practitioner in order to have one of these sites. I don't think this is a hard concept for you to wrap your brains around about how the internet's used. Anybody in here ever heard of the internet? Okay, good. I'm not going to spend any time on this. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. But telemedicine is something that is regarded as almost like a physical location for practice almost. You think about a lot of your mobile imaging that's considered like telehealth because it's radiology over, for example, I can have someone do a scan in my hospital at 11 p.m. and transmit the data so that there's a physician who's awake, and they can interpret, that radiologist can interpret the scan and immediately give us a result. And that's done through telemedicine. Also, there are, I think United Healthcare and Blue Cross Blue Shield also have apps that you can use on your phone and actually consult with a physician over the phone, giving them a few data points. They can make a diagnosis over your phone. That's pretty incredible. What are some of the barriers to something like this?
Insurance sometimes doesn't cover it.
Yeah, is that ethical? Is that an ethical issue? Could be, right? Someone's placing a limit on your access. Okay. So insurance, what other barriers? So for example, there's an app I think that you can use. You place your finger over your camera on your phone. It'll check your pulse rate. And I believe in some situations they say that it can check your blood pressure. And I believe that that's completely false. How accurate can those results be, right? Can you get guaranteed results from that? So there are barriers in that without correct technology in place. Lots of barriers. And we'll overcome those barriers over time, right? Happens. All right, so innovation and diffusion. What are we talking about with diffusion here? What is diffusion? When you're talking about services.
Service kind of spreading throughout, like a system or something.
Yeah, making it readily available, right? So we want to diffuse our system, our product, our procedure throughout a lot of locations because of multiple reasons. Why would we want that? It's okay to sound selfish. It's all right. Somebody's going to save money at some point, right? It helps keep the bottom line. It helps keep your organization viable. You establish a need, okay? And ultimately, some of it will come down to money because you need to remain afloat, okay? Ultimately, I get the comment by the end of the semester where people think I'm just some greedy jerk up here. I just look at it as viability. I mean, we have to make ends meet, right? We have to keep I look at it as my hospital with as good of outcomes as we have, we have the need to stay afloat. If we go out of business and we have the best outcomes in the United States, what does that do for the consumer of my goods? It's a big slap in the face to those people, right? I'm no longer being able to provide them superior care. They're stuck with a mediocre product. All right, so anyone here ever heard of the Tucker automobile? It's an interesting story, isn't it? The Tucker automobile was actually far better product than what was being produced by Ford, General Motors, or Chrysler at the time. Okay, very innovative, but had no funding and no backing and went out of business. Was driven out by the big three. Okay, it's really interesting. It's a good little documentary you can find. I read a book about it probably 10 years ago. The guy was a visionary, all right? Because of that, when he went out of business, they, a lot of the things he did became public, and so the big three adopted a lot of the things that he did. He brought us safety glass, for example. We wouldn't have safety glass in cars if it hadn't been for this protector. So I bring that up because that's what happens in medical technology a lot of times. Okay, we see a really superior product, but it can't get out there. It's squashed by monopolies, and it becomes an ethical consideration, right? So, how do cultural beliefs and values drive innovation? Can they squash innovation? Now, every time I think of this, I think of witches in the Salem witch trials. Just makes cultural beliefs squash different ideas. Okay? They can hurt, and sometimes they can help. Sometimes they can drive needs. Okay? Medical specialization, we talked about how medical technology has driven specialization. And as people hear about it, there's more of a need for it, right? Anybody here ever had a kale smoothie? It's okay to admit it. But think about it. There's a huge craze about kale, right? Oh, it's the next great thing that's going to make you perfectly healthy. When in all reality, it's probably no healthier than other greens on the market. But it was a great perceived need, okay? So, diffusion based on a perceived need is what happens with medical technology. We think we need it, so we go get it. And then you start seeing all these stores pop up, right? What's the latest medical craze right now? You're starting to see stores pop up.
CBD.
Yep, CBD, right? That kind of makes me laugh. I'm like, all right. And you will hear tons of propaganda about the benefits of CBD. Okay. How does competition drive innovation? This is my favorite. I think competition is the greatest driver of innovation there is. I just like to compete. Okay, I do. I like to compete. I think it's the best thing ever. If I know I can do better, I will try to do better. Okay? But it does. It drives tons of innovation. In fact, when there's no competition, you can see in areas where there's no competition that quality actually goes down dramatically. So look at what just happened with the mergers between Mountain States Health Alliance and Wellmont Health Systems. That's the biggest concern for many, is that the quality of care is going to go down. We're already seeing limits on where physicians can practice, where they may have been credentialed across the systems. Now they're only allowed to practice certain procedures in certain locations. So we'll see how that turns out. It's still in its infancy. We'll see how it happens, right? You also have to see what the competition is. Does that mean that there won't be any competition from Asheville or Knoxville? Will people branch out because of that? I think so. How about expenditures in research and development? We kind of beat this one up a little while ago, but does that drive innovation? And how does it drive innovation? And I'm asking all these questions because you never know what might be on an exam as an essay question. Everybody perks up a little bit when I say that. So how does R&D drive innovation? Isn't that the whole focus of R&D, right? Is to be better, to come up with a product that's state of the art. We already talked about supply side controls. Does government policy drive innovation? Yeah, it does. It makes funds available sometimes. Um, they, for example, with the automotive industry, they put in certain controls on emissions and said, look, you got to have a car that'll produce certain standard for gas mileage. If for this size vehicle, if it gets under this, then you can't produce that vehicle. For example, I rented a car last month to go to Chattanooga for a business trip, and they gave me a Ford F-150, this big Lariat edition, really nice, and I was thinking this thing's just going to suck the gas right out. I was shocked. There are times when I was getting like 22 miles a gallon for this huge thing. That's almost what my Nissan gets. Nissan Maxima. I'm thinking, how is this possible? But it happens, right? It's innovation. So government policy can do that. The problem with my experience with government policy and innovation is that it's usually much slower rate than something like competition, or something that when we have a perceived need, usually government regulation comes in after the fact. And there's a lot of ideas behind why that is, but usually government regulation pops in later. Okay. So you go through certain things with innovation. We primarily think of the FDA as dealing with drugs alone, but they approve all medical devices. And so the FDA has to go through and look and analyze each drug, make sure it's effective, that it meets what it says it does, that the byproducts that there's not a greater negative than there is a greater positive. Goodness gracious, can you imagine if 1 out of every 5 people died from consuming ibuprofen? If you think ibuprofen would stay on the shelves for very long? No, of course not, right? It had to go through an approval process, though. So the Affordable Care Act, when it was put into place, it put limits on all these biologics, okay? And what it did is it made it easier for things that were similar, drugs that were similar to things that were already present on the market. It made it easier for them to come to market. They didn't have to go through the entire process of evaluation. You could show how your product was similar to another company's product and bypass a couple of steps. So it would speed things to market. What happens when we speed things to market? What happens in this situation, for example, with drugs?
You could, miss, maybe a side effect or something.
Yeah, there might be a side effect or two missed, right? And then they have to go back and recall or make an adjustment to the drug, right? A secondary benefit, though, of this is that usually it increases competition, and with increased diffusion, prices drop. So think of the cost of pharmaceuticals. Name brands aren't pharmaceuticals once they're in the once you have a patent on it, you have a limited amount of time before that patent runs out and somebody can come in and produce a generic. And once a generic is produced, prices drop. So you have a limit. So you have to recoup your R&D money. Remember that huge amount of money, the billions, what was it, 181 billion, I think, or 118 billion dollars spent in R&D per year. imagine trying to recoup that money. Okay, because remember, R&D as a whole, that is on your general ledger, that is a cost center. It is not a producer. There's no sales going on in R&D. It's kind of like when you look at your hospital, your cost centers, you have way more cost centers than you do have producers, because you can only bill for certain things. You don't get to bill for environmental services, for example. You don't get to bill for plant operations. You don't get to bill for all these things that have regulatory requirements, but you still have to, so you have to have them. So these are true cost centers. So R&D is a true cost center. You have to recoup this. And so you jack the price up, right? Because you know that in 5 years or so, you're not going to be able to sell this product for the same amount of money. You're going to have some generic that's going to pop in. And that's an arbitrary number, by the way. It depends on the pharmaceuticals, little amount of time the patent will take place. And so keep that in mind. The speeding up of these biologicals being put in place, the pharmaceutical industry was in an uproar. They're like, are you kidding me? We spend how much in, lobbying? This is why there's so many rich lobbyists in the world, right? They spend all that time up in Washington trying to say, look, this is why you need us, okay? All right. Here's legislation as a history. Yeehaw. Okay, next one. Certificate of need. Does anybody understand certificate of need? Somebody want to walk us through that one? Nobody wants to walk us through certificate of need. I don't blame you. I don't want to walk you through certificate of need, but I'll do it. So certificate of need was discontinued in 1986 because what it is it says that if your organization wants to have, for example, an MRI machine, they submit an application to the federal government, and the federal government looks at it and says yes or no, you can purchase an MRI machine for your hospital. Okay? Why do you think they would discontinue that?
A lot of bureaucracy.
Yeah. What is the government really efficient at, right? That would not be one of those things. Okay? Not efficient. Can you imagine? Does the federal government know Johnson City very well, for example? Do you think that they know all of the needs of this city? They may look at this and go, you have a population of, I don't even know what the population of Johnson City is, but say Johnson City is 65,000 people. You have a population of 65,000 people. You already have one MRI machine or two MRI machines in your city. You don't need a third one. But do you? Okay, that's the question. Especially if you have two competing hospital systems in an area. They may say, look, how dare the government grant a monopoly on MRIs to another organization? So in essence, the government was in business with other organizations, right? All right. So the federal government got out of that business. But the states didn't. Some states maintained their certificate of need requirement. And this could be, for example, with the number of beds for your hospital. In the state of Tennessee, you have to submit a request to add beds to your organization. So say you are an 85-bed organization, you want to add 10 beds to your organization. You literally have to write a letter petitioning the state and explaining why you need 10 more beds. You have to show your rate of growth. You have to explain the hospital layout and the usage of those beds that you already have. Okay, so you have to be able to explain it. Because they want to be able to plan for that. They want to be able to say, well, you don't need 10 more beds in your hospital. They want to be able to say you don't need 2 MRI machines there because, personally, I think it's because they get more money out of it, right? You know you have to pay a bed tax in Tennessee? Yeah. So every quarter we write a big fat check to the state of Tennessee for having beds in our hospital. Pretty awesome, huh? Nursing homes get hit really hard with that because they have to pay a bed tax. Otherwise, they can have their state license pulled if they're not current. So for every bed you have in your building, you have to pay a certain percentage, and you pay it out. So So by maintaining a certificate of need, do you think they're going to turn you down for 10 additional beds? Not normally. But what they will do, for example, we just had Princeton Transitional Care merged with the Signature Healthcare System. And when they merged, Princeton was only 36 beds. Well, Mountain States had another skilled nursing facility close by that had, I can't remember how many beds it was. I want to say it was just 15 beds or something like that. And they were not using them. They had shut the SNF down completely, and so these beds were being unused. So when they advertised this deal, they said, we will also sell you these additional 15 beds, and you can make one larger building without having to petition the state for it. You just have to put your application in and merge the beds. Pretty good deal, right? But the state maintains the total number of beds available. And they'll look at an area and say, okay, we have 85 beds here, we have a 126 bed unit here, we have a 200 bed unit here, and they're all operating at about 65% capacity. You come in as a new organization, you want to apply for 20 bed facility, they can say no. Say no, you don't need to bring that in because there's no need for it. We've got these other organizations that are only working at 60% capacity. Does that limit access to people? To services? It can, right? Especially think about it. You've got a bunch of old facilities in an area. None of them are up to date. I'm not saying that's what we have here, but you could have this scenario where there's a bunch of really outdated facilities with no modern, I can't even think of the word. Nothing that's up to date for their services. Their services are outdated, but yet they maintain all of those beds, and the state may look at it and go, you don't need the beds, and so it limits a community to outdated services only. Okay, so you better have a really good administrative team when you make those approaches when it comes to certificate of need. Okay. All right, AHRQ and the NIH are probably the two biggest organizations for grants and offering funding to organizations to do research. AHRQ, they look at quality and cost reduction for access. They have great tools. If you ever want to use quality tools for a research project, I highly recommend their website. They have so many free items on there, and for students especially, they have items on there that you can use. Our hospital has access to a lot of their data points. We report a lot of things to them as well. We report things such as, especially the NIH, we report infection rates. We report things such as our wound care percentages. So if we have a hospital acquired the cubitus, we report that. And in return, we get other resources to help prevent those things from happening. Pretty interesting, right? I can see it on your faces. Does medical technology impact quality of care? Yeah, we've been talking all night about how it impacts quality of care and quality of life. We know that it affects the healthcare cost across the board. But how does medical technology affect structure? That's a question. I'm out of water, so we're going to be short-lived on this. How does it affect structure of your organization?
New technology, you have to accommodate it somehow. Could make something else obsolete. You've got to change your structure, how you do things.
Yeah, it absolutely changes. It can change everything. You think about, I'm trying to give you a specific example. Well, first of all, you have to have a technology department, right? You don't just say, hey, we're going to add a bunch of technology into our building and no one knows how to use training involved. You have to have people who are certified and trained to use that technology. It also may cut jobs in a lot of situations because what a procedure, for example, like some of our robotic surgeries now don't require as large of a staff. Um, think of infection prevention. Some of the technologies that are in place now don't require the physical process of hand cleaning items. In fact, um, some of our surgical tools now are produced so cheaply, it's more expensive to clean them than it is to replace them. And so we just toss them after each use. Pretty wild, huh? So lots of different jobs. So jobs really shift in a lot of ways. Has technology allowed for more of a global practice? I know I gave radiology as an example, but have you seen any other ways that practices have changed because of technology? I mean, people can do consults from across the country. When I had this whole thing pop up with my weird diagnosis for all these scars I get on my face, fun stuff. They did a consult. I told you. Did I tell you about that? Okay. He did a consult with Mayo Clinic. You know, just like that. No big deal. Sent him photographs, measurements, lab results. Checked it out. Okay. All right, HTAs. What is a health technology assessment? So glad you guys are awake. So health technology assessment is literally what it sounds like. We will assess for a specific technology and the need for it. And it usually is interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. So we will see how this can affect a community. We may use public health resources, hospital resources, private practice resources to get an idea of whether or not a service is needed. We want to look at where it will be used and why we would use it or why we wouldn't use it. There's a specific pattern for these, and I think that in another class you actually get to do this. Community needs assessment, things like that. But just be familiar with this, the idea that an HTA is always multidisciplinary, okay? That's really important piece of this, is that it occurs across a spectrum of organizations. So why would you want multiple organizations doing an assessment on a need, a community need?
You'll just get a lot of different viewpoints.
Yeah, it's perspective, right? Yeah, we want to have good perspective. It's just a really good, clean business model, to be honest. So they'll look at the cost effectiveness of something. They'll look at the cost benefit. Are there any ethical considerations to be made when looking at something from a cost perspective? It's a redundant question, right? It's obvious. Of course there are, right? There are lots of ethical considerations to be made. So, and that's why I want you to think about this. When we talk about medical technology, think about how it impacts a community and where do you draw the line on making something available. I used a few weeks ago my friend Josh, who has terminal brain cancer. You know, he's literally grasping at straws if he, to get, well, I guess that's figuratively, grasping at straws, not literally, to get something that will help prolong his life. And how do you tell a person like that no? but this test will cost too much, or this test will, you'll have to fly across the country. Only one location has it available. You know, he's a father of 3 little kids. You know, it's sad. So there are ethical considerations to be made. All right. Right now, primarily, your HTAs will be between the DVA and Department of Defense. Those are the big ones. The problem is the standard methods. If you're going to do an HTA, you need to have a standardized approach. If, for example, your public health organization is doing an HTA from a different angle, and they're not using the same, they're not looking for the same data points, and looking through, if you're not looking through the same lens, then how are you going to get relatable data, okay? We do not like change in our country. We don't. We want change, but we don't like it. And so most of our organizations will just try to stay where they are. So as long as their organizations are viable, they'll just stay where they are. They don't feel a need to change. And so when we add new services, it usually has to come because of a push. That's all I got. Everybody upset by that? I could spend all night talking about that last slide, but really, you have great books, you have great minds. If I give you the time off, will you go home and read? Everybody promises they'll go home and read this. And it's a bunch of liars in this room, is what you are. All right. If you need anything between now and next week, call me, text me. I haven't caught up on emails, so if you sent me any emails this past 5 days, I haven't responded. I apologize. I've literally been dealing with this. Have a great evening.